Good morning, and as Len made sure to remind us, Chodesh Tov. Today is the first day of the month of Nisan. It's a holiday in its own right. Every Rosh Chodesh, every time that we celebrate the renewal of the month, the birth of the new moon, it's a special day. It's a day. It's also a good reminder for us that just like the moon has cycles of it's up, it's down, it's big, it's small, so too we do as well. And the Jewish people, although we have hardships, so we might sometimes feel small, ultimately the new month, the Rosh Chodesh, will come again, and we will once again be reborn. Right? The moon is always there. It's just a question of how strongly you see it. And so it is true for the Jewish people, and especially this month, as we start Chodesh Nisan, the month in which we celebrate Passover, which generally speaking, the rabbis tell us is a month of redemption. It's a month of good news. And just as we were redeemed from Egypt, so too we were redeemed from the current exile. And Nisan is as good a time as any, maybe even better for it to happen. So Chodesh Tov, and it's also officially spring on the Jewish calendar. And so it's a good reminder to make sure that we're ready for Pesach, make sure our Seder plans and our Shmor Matzah and everything that we need is ready to go. In Tanya, we are at a bit of a pause point. We're about to start a new topic. And although generally speaking, Tanya is one conversation, it's one book, it's a guidebook, it's an instruction book for all of us. There are different themes that, sections of chapters talk about different themes. And if we start from the beginning of Tanya, we had a first conversation about the spiritual composition of a Jew. What makes us tick? What makes us go? What makes us who we are? And the answer is we have, generally speaking, a godly soul and we have an animal soul. The godly soul wants to reconnect. The godly soul has a natural inborn love for God and wants to reconnect and become one with God by doing what God wants. And every sentence that I'm saying here is summarizing another chapter, and I highly encourage, as always, to review and to go back and to look at it again. We have a godly soul that wants to reconnect to God by doing what God wants. We have an animal soul that just wants to fulfill its own pleasure-seeking ways. Not necessarily evil, doesn't necessarily want to do bad things. It wants selfish things. And it happens to be that as physical humans in a physical world, selfish things can often be the wrong things, can often be sinful things, can often be evil things, etc. Our psyche, our internal battle, is the battle of these two souls. The godly soul that wants every decision to be about God, and the animal soul that wants every decision and every action to be about me, both in thought, in speech, and in action. Now there are three possible outcomes to this battle. We have the tzaddik, and I want to reiterate again that when we say the word tzaddik, right, which generally translates as a righteous person, right, we're about to sit down at the Seder, and there are the four sons. There's the chacham, the wise son, the wicked son, the sons who don't know how to ask. And words, we sort of generalize, but when we use the word tzaddik here, tzaddik does not mean the way we might imagine a tzaddik. We imagine a guy who does pretty good and, does a lot of mitzvos, does a lot of good deeds. He's a tzaddik. Or is anyone who ever had someone who speaks Yiddish? You're such a tzaddikul, you're such a good boy, you're such a good kid. Right? That word has a lot of meanings. And from a halachic perspective, what does a tzaddik mean, right? After 120 years, when we have to do judgment for what we've done, we'll be judged on a majority. Were you a pretty good person, or were you a pretty bad person? The Alter Rebbe introduces us to a new translation of the word tzaddik, which is somebody who is completely perfect. They are so perfect that they have destroyed their animal soul. Their animal soul is no longer a factor, either completely decimated and destroyed, or it's so bruised, battled, and never picks its head up again. And that means that the tzaddik no longer has the internal struggle that we are all so familiar with. And that is because the tzaddik of Tanya, right, all of us should strive to be a tzaddik. All of us should strive to be the best person we possibly could. But the description that the Tanya has for a tzaddik is not something which is in our control necessarily. This is someone who, this was always his life mission, to be able to conquer his animal soul. We have the other side, which is a Rasha. A Rasha is someone who has lost or is currently losing or is able to lose a battle. Not the war, right? We're not talking about someone who's necessarily completely wicked and never does anything good. We're talking about someone who sometimes gives in to his internal temptation. When faced with the choice, if he should do a mitzvah, right? Just to use a very random example, not saying God forbid that this is a sin, but to give an example of if someone has $100 and they have the choice of either to spend it on cake or to give it to charity, if they give in to their animal soul and buy the cake, during that moment they are called, and I'm very, very aware that the descriptions that we're using here are very, very harsh. And that's because we're not describing, give me 1 second to just finish this thought. We're not describing, are you a good person or are you a bad person? You could buy all the cake you want and you're a good person. I mean, don't speak to your doctor or dietitian about it, but you're fine. It's okay. But if we look at it through the lens that the Tanya invites us to look through, every action, right? Let's forget about the money example. I have 5 free minutes, and I am faced with a choice. Do I scroll through Instagram, or do I learn Torah for these 5 minutes? Is it a sin to scroll through Instagram? Probably not. In fact, in some cases, it's probably a good thing, right? Whether you're using it for the right purposes, you're using it, or you need a break. You're a human, you need to relax, you need your body to relax for a second, and therefore it's okay to do it. But if I don't need that, if I could just as easily and just as pick up a holy book and learn some Torah, or indulge myself and scroll through my phone, then that choice is a moment where I am having an internal battle between my godly soul and my animal soul. My godly soul wants to learn Torah, and my animal soul wants to do whatever it wants. It wants cake, it wants Instagram, it wants all the wonderful things in the world. And that is the internal battle that we have. Now, as I mentioned, a tzaddik is someone who has destroyed their internal, they don't have that battle anymore. They have no temptation to open up Instagram. And the reason is they are so full of love of God and awe of God that it just doesn't even enter their mind to want to do anything but connect to God. However, when we win the battle, we didn't win the war, right? This is an ongoing battle in the next section, right? We have this section. In the next section, the Alter Rebbe is going to start talking about, it can be pretty depressing, and what do we do about that, and what can we focus on? But ultimately, our life mission, and when I say our, I'm referring specifically to myself, because I don't want to pass judgment on anyone else at the table, but our life mission is to keep our head above water. Is we're faced with the temptation, we're faced with the desires day in and day out, and our job is to succeed. Our job is to be victorious, to not fall into that temptation. That person is called a Beinoni. And that is the title of this book, the Tanya. Tanya is really not the name of the book. The Tanya is just the name. The first word of the book is called Tanya, is the word Tanya, so we call it the Tanya. It really is called Likutei Amarim, which means a collection of sayings. It's a thesis of a collection of teachings. Sefer Shel Beinonim, the book for the Beinoni. And now, a Beinoni in modern, in the way we would translate it is your average person. Not specifically great, not specifically bad, just your average person. The Alter Rebbe says no. From the very harsh, very specific, very black and white lens that the Tanya wants us to look through, as soon as someone sins, they're not a Beinoni, they're a Rasha. And again, even if they're not sinning, but they're choosing to go after their animal soul instead of their godly soul, they're a Rasha in that moment. So what is a Beinoni? A Beinoni is someone that for every moment of their life, even though they're faced with the temptations, even though they want to go on their phone, even though they want to eat the cake, even though they want to rob the bank, they don't. They have the ability to just say no, to control themselves. Now, the obvious question is, how is that possible? How is it possible that every temptation you just say no? Again, the tzaddik has it easy. The tzaddik is so consumed with his love of God and his awe of God and his fear of God that he doesn't even have the temptation. And you might even have a Beinoni, which is also like this. Right? If you were to try to tempt me with certain sins, it just doesn't interest me. I'm sorry. I'm not that person. I have no interest in robbing banks. But that's me. right? For someone or the parts of me that do have the temptation, how is it possible to just say no? And the answer that we've been explaining over the last few chapters is a very simple thought process. And that process is, you think about God, you understand about God, you think about how amazing and great God is, and then intellectually, you love and you fear God. Again, this is the previous section of Tanya is talking about an intellectual emotion. I don't necessarily feel very strongly about God. However, I understand what this means for my life. I understand who God is. I understand what it means to be separated from God. I understand what it means to be connected to God, and therefore, intellectually at least, I have a desire to connect to God. I have a fear, I have a repulsion of being separated from God, and therefore, I don't sin. And by tapping into that meditation, anytime I'm faced with a sin, right, I'm a human. I have a very strong desire to do something that I shouldn't. Going back to our innocuous example, I have a very strong desire to rob a bank. What's stopping me? I'm human. Right? I don't have a love of God. The fear of how much I'm going to be separated from God if I, God forbid, sin, that doesn't talk to me. What does talk to me is I sit and I meditate and I think about how great God is and how wonderful God is. And then, even though I'm not necessarily, consumed with the love and fear of God, I understand that I should be, and that stopped me. An example we can give for this is someone who's on trial. Right? So sometimes we have certain life or death situations that we feel it viscerally. We know this is this is all or nothing, this is make it or break it, and we're very afraid, right? But you could also be sitting in a courtroom, and there's a judge and a jury, and you don't feel afraid when you see the judge. He's a regular guy. You just shared a urinal next to him in the bathroom. What are you talking about? He's a regular person. And yet, if I think for a few minutes and I realize that my entire future is in this person's hands, I have a certain reverence, right? I have to intellectually create that reverence, or in God, I have to emotionally create that love, that fear, and that is a process by which, through meditation, the Beinoni can train himself in that way. And as we continued in chapter 17, which was last week's chapter, we discussed how we can now understand the foundational verse of the Tanya. And if you give me one moment, I'll be right back.
I'll get it.
No, it's right there. Thank you. I want to read. This is a Tanya. Actually, wait, hold back here. This is a Tanya specially printed here in northern Nevada. The Rabbi had a campaign of printing Tanyas. Anywhere where there are Jews that reside, Jews that live, there should be a Tanya printed locally, right? Locally sourced Tanya. This is a Tanya printed locally. God willing, in the next few months, hopefully we'll have some more information about other places. Now that there are so many Chabad families here and different communities, we'll hopefully do it again. But this locally printed Tanya, if we look at the front page, this is the title page of the Tanya, and I'm going to read it. We touched on this when we first started, about 18 classes ago. I'm going to read the main section here. Sefer Lekutei Amarim Chelik Rishon, the book, a collection of teachings, part 1, Hanikra B'Shem, which is called Sefer Shel Beinonim, Melukav B'Misvarim B'Seferim Kachei Elyon Nishmas Edim, which is collected from teachings and from books and from teachers that are holy. Meyusid, based al pasuk, on the verse, Ki karev elecha hadavar me'oid beficha ubuvavcha lasesei. Based on the verse, for it is close to you in your this thing, right? Keeping Torah, being religious, connecting to God, is close to you, very close, in your mouth, in your heart, to do it. That is the foundational verse of the Tanya. The entire thesis that the Alter Rebbe is coming to answer is one basic question. Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jewish people, and tells us, because Torah is eternal, it's very easy for you to do the right thing. And as we discussed last week at length, factually that's incorrect. Was Moshe lying? Was Moshe wrong? Is the Torah wrong? How is it possible to say that it's very easy to do this thing? You know what? Action, all right. You have some self-discipline, action. But love and fear, to say that's very easy, to have an emotional connection to God, that's not easy. I'm human. I have an emotional connection to robbing banks and eating cake. And the Alter Rebbe continues, Levi Hatif, to explain it well, Eichu Karev Ma'od, how is it very close? B'derech Arucha Uktsara Be'ezus Hashem, in a long and short way. Now those words, in a long and short way, can be understood in two different ways. One of them is that the Alter Rebbe is giving two paths. There are two ways for us to tap into this connection. There is a long way and there is a short way. There's the long path, the much more tedious, long and hard work. Then there's a short and easy way. But there's another angle to that as well. And that is connected to a story that's brought in the Talmud. There was one very, very wise rabbi who said, I'm a very good debater, and I have, mastered anyone who's come up against me, except for the youths of Jerusalem. They've outconned me every time. They've outworded me. And he gave some examples of times that he said something and the kids, outsmarted him. He said one of them is that he saw a kid walking with a covered pan. And I said, what's in the pan? He said, well, if my mother wanted you to know what's in the pan, she wouldn't have covered him. Another example is he asked one of these kids for directions. And the kid told him, there's two ways to get there. Google Maps has two ways to show. There's a long way and a short way. He says, all right, I'll take the short way, right? Who doesn't want to save some time? He says, not a problem. Go right over that hill and you're there. But as he tries to climb the hill, it's a steep hill and there's rocks and there's thorn bushes and there's a wall in the way. He can't actually get there. So he comes back to the kid and says, what did you send me on a dead end? He says, it's the shortest way. As the bird, these days would call it, as the bird flies, that's the quickest way to get there. Is it the easiest? Absolutely not. It's much harder. You want the long way? Sure. Follow the highway around the hill and you're there. It's a much longer way. It takes longer, but it's so much easier. It's so much smoother. And that is how many commentaries and teachers of the Tanya explain the difference of what we discussed until now and what we're about to discuss. Because from chapter 18, for about the next 8 chapters, the Alter Rebbe introduces another way for the Beinoni to have a love and fear of God. The Beinoni, which is all of us struggling people. Why do we need this new way? Why do we need another way to have this love and fear of God? Is because what we're talking about in the previous chapters, about the meditation, and you can train yourself to have it, just because it's possible, doesn't mean that it's easy. And doesn't mean that it's simple. It's simple, it's very straightforward, but it takes a long time and a lot of hard work, right? Can I run a marathon? Yes. Technically speaking, there is nothing stopping me from running a marathon. But if I was to try to do it, even if I train, it will take a lot of training and a lot of conditioning. Is it possible for me? Yes. Is it easy for me? Is it very close to me? Absolutely not. And if we think about the meditation that the Alter Rebbe wants us to have, right? Again, what is through chapter 17? What are we saying? We're saying think about God, understand about God, understand that you should love and fear God, and that will cause you to at least intellectually have those emotions. The problem is, first of all, you have to have a brain. You have to be able to understand things. It's not, the Alter Rebbe said it as like a simple thing. Everyone, right? All of us, we have a brain in our heads. But do we understand about God? We appreciate God? Because remember, we're talking about trying to get emotion out of intellect. Which means the more we understand and the deeper we understand, the more and deeper the love will be. So yes, I can tell you a very simple fact about God. God created everything, and we're all a rounding error. The whole universe is a rounding error in God's eyes, and therefore, God is amazing, but it's very hard to extract an emotion from that. When you really meditate, and you really understand, which by the way, the entire genre of Chabad, out of all the Hasidic groups, Chabad has a much more bigger emphasis on study, on in-depth study, on very, very understanding, very complicated, very seemingly abstract, mystical concepts. Why? Because the more I understand those, the more I'll be able to build that emotion, the more I'll be able to turn that knowledge into love and fear. But that's not practical for everyone. That's not simple. That's not easy. Is it possible? 100%. There is nothing stopping anyone from around this table by utilizing their brains to learn, to study, to appreciate, and to get there. But you can't tell me that it's easy. You can't tell me that it's simple. And another wrinkle in that whole system is that, as the Alter Rebbe finished off chapter 17, if we have become coarse, if we have become desensitized through sin, which, sad to say, most of us are, most of us don't have the sensitivity, don't have the nuances, spiritually speaking, to really appreciate Chassidus, to really appreciate these intellectual connections to God, and it's not going to happen. The Alter Rebbe spoke about, it in the extreme of you have a rasha, you have someone who's so wicked and so sin, they become so coarse, they could meditate from today to tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. It's just because you need a certain refinement, you need a certain sensitivity. And the Alter Rebbe even sort of phrases it as a punishment, or as we would say, as a consequence of you do a lot of things against God, you can't turn around and expect the next day to have the sensitivity to ignite a love and fear of God. For all of those reasons, the Alter Rebbe starts chapter 18 with a question, which is what we explained up through chapter 17 about the process of meditating to bring up and to ignite a love and fear of God. It's possible, but it's not easy. It's not simple. Yes?
Chapter 17 was talking about some hay in Teshuvah.
Yes.
The upper hay and the lower. Did we discuss that? Or is that something that's related?
So we did discuss, I'll repeat Jacob's question. Last week in chapter 17, we discussed about the upper hay and the lower hay, and how there are different, which is really, the response to how is it possible, if someone is too coarse, how could they, right? Is all hope lost? Once once someone has coarsened up their body, once they're no longer refined, is there any hope? And the answer is yes. And that hope is that they can take the coarseness itself, use that as a catalyst for change by appreciating and by being upset about how far they've fallen, then specifically because, and that has to do with different ideas of the higher form of teshuvah and a lower form of teshuvah, off topic for, even last week it was off topic, so we didn't focus on it, definitely now when we're ready to move forward, but I'm happy to discuss it with you more later. There's an entire section, right? This is section 1 of Tanya. Section 3 is called Igeres HaTshuva, which is a selection of letters about the process of teshuvah and about the different ways of repentance and returning to God. A very, very beautiful, very in-depth discussion there. But for our conversation here, the Alter Rebbe starts off with a question, which is, while it may be possible, it may be doable for every single Jewish person and every person to ignite a love and fear, to have that emotional, that intellectual emotion, the one thing you can't say is that it's easy. It's not easy at all. Right? If it was easy, everyone would do it. Everyone would walk home from when we taught, I believe it was chapter 13 or 14 or maybe 15, where we taught the basics, and suddenly everyone's a perfect Jew.
So what's wrong with that?
And there's no problem. It's okay for it to be hard work. And in fact, as we'll see, there's going to be a balance of the hard way and the long way, and the short way and short and easy way. But the one word you cannot use to describe it is karov me'od. Very close. Right, again, if I were to run a marathon, is it possible for me to run a marathon? Wow, thank you everyone for the vote of confidence. Yes, of course it's possible. Right? It just is a lot of long and hard work to get it done. So can I wake up this morning and say, it's close for me to run a marathon? It's easy for me to... No. Is it possible? Yes. But the Alter Rebbe doubles down and takes issue with the words, it's very close to do this thing. How is he going to answer it? So to answer it, the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce an entirely new form of love and fear for God. An entirely new concept in the relationship that we have with God. And this is that every single Jewish person, by virtue of being a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, we have an inheritance, an inborn love and fear of God. And the Alter Rebbe, we're going to explore this slowly over the next 8 chapters. So we're going to take it step by step. And in this week, the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce us to how exactly that works.
That's good.
It's great. It's the easy way. Because all you have to do then is learn how to tap into it.
Yeah.
I will say it is very much, though, an easy way, but to live your life like that is not easy. This is very much a flash in the pan. This is very much, you can tap into it, which we'll discuss. So we'll take it step by step, how exactly you tap into it, and what are you tapping into, and how all of that we'll discuss. But none of this negates the importance, right? As Jacob said, it's good to have some hard work. It's good to work towards a goal. It's very important to train ourselves to have those meditations that we discussed until now, because that's what lasts. You know, if I'm up against a wall and there's an emergency and I'm faced with a temptation and I can't stop it, chapter 18 through 25 is going to tell us what we can do in that scenario. But it's very, very hard to live every single day on fight or flight, as we'll see, as we discuss slowly. But we'll start on page 2. Ulatesvis beer. Bayer hativ milas ma'oid shebapasuk yikarev elacha hadavar ma'oid v'gamer. To explain more clearly, again, we're coming from chapter 7, well, the Alter Rebbe gave a basic explanation. Saying, right, because the question of this verse is generally speaking, Moshe says it's possible for every Jew to act, speak, and love, and have an emotional connection to God. How is that possible? So the Alter Rebbe explained that it is technically possible to write meditations you can evoke an intellectual emotion. But now the Alter Rebbe is doubling down. To explain more clearly and more precisely the word very in the verse, for this thing is very near to you. That word very is doing a lot of heavy lifting. And now the Alter Rebbe is going to explain, how does that work? How can I say it's very easy to do something like that? The Alter Rebbe just spent, it took us a few months to learn it. It takes us a lifetime to master it. You can't use the word very. So continuing on page 3. Tzarich leida ne'emana, ki af mi shedaitek tzara b'diyas Hashem, ve'ein le leiv lahavim migdulas ein seif baruch hu. One should recognize with a certainty that even the person who has only a limited understanding of God's greatness, so he lacks the materials necessary for meditation, and he has no heart to comprehend the greatness of the blessed infinite God, his mind and heart are not suited to meditation, so he lacks the tools of the meditation, right, as we discussed. A lot of things could go wrong in that whole simple-seeming meditation idea. Very simple. You think about God, and that encourages you. In order to think about God, I have to understand God. I have to know God. Obviously knowing God is impossible, but I have to know about God. Our knowledge, and I'm including myself on this, barely scratches the surface of what it means to truly understand or appreciate even the things that we could understand about God. That's a lifetime of learning. So if somebody doesn't have that knowledge yet, it's pointless. There's a disagreement, very respectful usually, between the way Chabad does in reach, right, bringing Jewish people closer to their roots, and the way some other groups do. The first question a Jewish person, when they meet a Chabad rabbi, is what's the first question a Chabad rabbi is going to ask you? Tefillin. Once we establish you're Jewish, that's a very important step. Did you put on tefillin? Can I offer you Shabbos candles? Right? We go straight to the action. Other people say no. You can put on tefillin on someone who doesn't know what they're doing, who doesn't appreciate why they're doing it. Right? I've put on people that I can promise you, they probably think back to that weird morning that they met some kid on the street who put a tefillin with them. They don't know what they did. They don't understand the connection, the relationship. Right? So are we, based on what we're talking about till now, you can only start to hope to maybe become a Beinoni once you've mastered knowledge about God. You can say that's Ma'od, very close to you, Karev Ma'od. Or even if you do understand them, not everyone is refined enough to really appreciate it and that it should have an actual impact on them.
So why is it so important to start out with, why not just give them a paragraph of what, an important thing that God wants us to know, rather than just stopping somebody and putting them on tefillin?
If I have 30 seconds with someone, I'll put on tefillin with them. If I have a minute and 30 seconds with them, I'll spend a minute explaining tefillin and then 30 seconds putting it on. Because it really comes down to, in an emergency situation, What's the vital thing? If I have 30 seconds with someone, if I try to explain to them anything about God, I'll lose them and they'll be gone and they won't have a chance to do a mitzvah. And as we're going to explain much later in Tanya, the number one most important thing on this world, what's the number one most important thing? Is to actually do a mitzvah. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no importance in the kavanah, in the understanding. All of those are important. Obviously, everything is a balance. But when we boil it down to, I only have an hour, I only have 5 minutes, I only have 2 minutes, I only have 1 minute. What do I do during that 1 minute? Action. Do a mitzvah. There's a very famous story, and I'll come back to you guys in 1 second, of someone asked to the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rabbi. He says, my schedule is very, very busy. Incredibly busy. I only have, I'll give a number, a half hour a day to learn Torah. That's it. What should I learn? There's so many topics I learn. Chumash, Gemara, Halacha, Chassidus. What should I learn? He says, you should learn Chassidus. You should learn Chassidic thought. You should learn Tanya, learn something like that. He says, really? I only have a half hour to learn. Shouldn't I learn something more practical, more moving, something, or more basic like Chumash? So the Tzemach Tzedek told him, once you start learning Chassidus for a half hour, very quickly you'll realize you don't only have a half hour to learn. Right? Why? Right? Because when I have to boil down to the one thing that I have to do, we have to do the most important thing. Either in the case of learning, the thing that will bring me to learn more, or in the case of a practical mitzvah, to do the mitzvah of tefillah. That is the number one most important thing. Is it important to understand why I'm doing it? 1,000%. But what's more important? To understand why I'm putting on tefillin or to put on tefillin? To put on tefillin. And therefore, if I have 30 seconds with someone, that's what I'll do. If I have a lifetime with someone, we'll sit down and we'll start learning, we'll start davening. But that's, again, a question of priorities. And that's what we're talking about here. In a certain sense, we got a little bit off topic. But when the Alter Rebbe describes in the last few chapters about this lifelong meditation of understanding and having that have an effect on you, that's not practical for most people. What can I do today to be a Beinoni? What can I do today to withstand the temptations? Right? Not everyone has the knowledge or the heart to appreciate. Continuing on page 3, to produce through meditation a fear and love even in his mind and understanding alone, as we described in the previous chapters. Afal Pikain, Karev Elav, Hadavar Ma'id, Lishmar Ulasis, Kol mitzvahs Atera, V'Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Yet it is a very near thing for him to guard himself from transgressing the prohibitive commandments through a fear of God, and to practice the positive commandments require a love of God. These together are comprising all the mitzvahs, all the commandments of the Torah, and in particular the study of Torah, which counterbalances them all. B'fiv ubeluvavai mamish, me'umka deliba be'emes lamitasei dechilu urchimu. He can fulfill, right? The Alter Rebbe is stating this as fact because Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah tells us that it's a fact, that every single Jewish person, no matter what your knowledge level is, no matter what your spiritual refinement level is, you are able to fulfill all the mitzvahs of the Torah. He can fulfill all this in his mouth and his heart, in the true sense of heart. That is not only in the superficial sense of heart, which means in his thoughts, right, as we explained last week, but in the true sense with his heart, namely with feeling from the depths of the heart, with an absolute sincerity, with love and fear. You don't have to rely on intellectual emotions. You are able to have a true emotional, visceral love and fear of God. How?
That's good too.
It's great. Now we have to learn how to do it. It's great and it's very useful, and as we continue in our journey, it's going to be very, very important. How is it possible? And the answer is, you have it built in your system settings. Somewhere buried deep inside, those features are already there. We just have to learn how to enable them. That was a bit of computer speak for those of us who spend our time tinkering with computers. Deep within our operating system, deep within our soul, we have that love and fear. Where did it come from? We got it as an inheritance. In the ways of acquiring something, Right? There's, generally speaking, three ways that I can acquire something new. Either I buy it, or I get it as a gift, or I get it as an inheritance. Those are, generally speaking, the three ways you can acquire something. Now, in order to get something by buying it or by trading for it, it means I have to have something of equal value that I can trade for it. Even receiving a gift, generally speaking, people don't give gifts out for nothing. Generally speaking, there's something that I have. Either they want to curry favor, or I've done something for them, or I will do something for them. There's some reason why someone's giving me a gift. People don't walk up to you, in the middle of the street and just hand you gifts, unless they're filming a YouTube video, in which case you also have something for them, which is the publicity. What is the one form of completely unconditional, you get it no matter what you've done, what you haven't done? Inheritance. What's the only thing you have to do to get an inheritance? Be lucky enough to be born into the right family. That's it. And that's why the tiniest infant can inherit, because it's not about them. It's just something that they were lucky enough to be born into the right family, and so they get an inheritance. And that is the same thing when it comes to this inheritance that we received from our forefathers. What do we get from them? We have an inborn love and fear of God.
A convert gets that.
Yes.
By converting.
Yes, because as we'll see, this lives in the soul. And so, religiously, spiritually speaking, a convert is a descendant of Avram as well. That's why when we call up a convert to the Torah, we call them the son and daughter of Abraham and Sarah, because they are adopted into it, and spiritually speaking, they get that as well. Because again, we're not talking about a genealogical connection, we're talking about a spiritual connection. So any spiritual descendants, we can use that word if you'd like, any spiritual descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, get this, no questions asked. You could be the most amazing, holy, spiritual, tzaddik Jew, and you could be the most low-life, sinning all day, barely has a connection, doesn't do anything, and you still get it. Why? Because of who your grandparents are. George Rohr, I believe it was him, who was a very, very famous, who is, may he live and be well, a very famous philanthropist and supporter of Chabad causes, Chabad on campus, Chabad. There's a lot of important causes. He once came to the Rabbi and was very proud to report that in his synagogue in Manhattan, they had instituted a new minyan for those with no background. He was very proud because a bunch of people showed up and it was very successful, and he expected, the Rabbi to give him a yashar koach, a thank you. The Rabbi turned to him, was very surprised, and said, Jews with no background? There's no such thing as a Jew with no background. Every Jewish person is a descendant of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. There's no such thing as a Jew without background. And that is the topic of this chapter. Every single Jewish person has a neshama, has that godly soul, and we got it as an inheritance. And the one thing about inheritance is, doesn't matter what you've done, what you haven't done, you earned it, you didn't earn it, none of that matters. You were born into the right family, you get the inheritance. You were born or became a Jewish person, you get this soul, you get this inborn love and fear of God. Now, it's easier said than done, right? Just like an inheritance, if you have to go through probate, that can be a whole process. We will have to learn how to tap into it, and it will require some knowledge, and it will require, and there's, nothing is a given. We still have to do something for it, but this actually is very easy to do. This actually, once we can, once we can appreciate how it works, this is very close to every one of us to tap into this innate hidden love. Continuing on page 4. This is the hidden love present in the heart of all Jews, which is an inheritance to us from our patriarchs. And here the Alter Rebbe throws in a disclaimer that we're going to spend the next few chapters understanding this love, understanding what its concept is, but we must first preface a clear and precise explanation of the origin of this love, i.e. which level of soul it stems from, and its character, i.e. what sort of striving this love constitutes. We spend a lot of time on these topics. Also, how does this love become our inheritance? And how does one inherit a love, right? You can inherit a lot of things from your parents. Good looks, certain abilities, certain talents, but a love, a fear, how does that, and how fear is also incorporated in it. All of these are going to be discussed over the next bunch of chapters. Starting with that first question of where does this love come from? It comes from our forefathers. And what made our forefathers, the patriarchs and the matriarchs, what make them different from any other good person, or any other tzaddik, even the most incredible tzaddikim, is that they are referred to as a chariot. And with self-driving cars, this example gets a little bit muddled. But if you were to think about a horse and buggy, right? The horse, although it listens to the rider, it has its own things, right? It sees a patch of grass, maybe wants to veer a little bit. You can have a fight with your horse about which direction to go. Even if you're completely in control over it, the horse has its own desires to go a certain way. A chariot has no internal desires. It goes exactly where it's pointed. It goes exactly where it's directed, right? Until about 10 years ago, you could say this about cars as well. Your car goes exactly where you point it. You stare at, you go, right? We used to say, if your car is going in the wrong direction, if the car disagrees with you where to go and starts pointing in the other direction, take it to the mechanic as soon as possible. There's something very wrong with your car. These days, technology has changed that. But if we look at the difference between a horse and a chariot, a horse, even if it listens, it has its own desires. It could go the other way, even when it listens to you. A chariot has no desires on its own. And that is the level of subservience that our forefathers had towards God. They had none of their own internal, it was all gone. Everything they did was so naturally pulled towards God. There's in the verse, when describing the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak. We say it every day in our prayers. And one of the things is, it says that Avram sent his hand. Vayishtach Avram es yadai, that he sent his hand to go perform the deed. The question is, the Torah gives some detail to the story. Doesn't every time you move, doesn't have pages of describing Avram walking, that he put his leg first and his leg first and his leg first. Why does the Torah take a second or take a couple of words to say, Vayishtach Avram es yado, Avraham sent his hand, lishchot es beno, to slaughter his son? Why does it have those extra words that he sent forth his hand? And the explanation is given that Avram was so in tune, was so naturally subservient to God, that exactly what God wanted him to do, that's naturally what his body did. In this moment, did God really want Avram to slaughter his son? Of course not. It was a test. And therefore, Avram's body was so in tune with what God wants, that his body wasn't naturally doing it. And it's like, wait a second, I have to why isn't my hand listening? Right? The sign of a healthy limb is when it just goes naturally. You have to think about, let me pick up my hand and go. That's not a sign of a healthy thing. And so that's why it was weird for Avram in the moment. He had to actively send his hand. His body wasn't naturally flowing in the way that it usually did when he was listening to God's commandment, because really God didn't want this to happen, and therefore his body was resistant to it. That is the idea that's discussed often, very, very often in Hasidic thought. Our patriarchs were chariots to God. On page 5, the explanation is as follows: the patriarchs were truly the chariot of God, i.e. they're completely subservient to him and have no other will but the divine will, just as a chariot has no will of its own but is directed solely by the will of its rider. The Alkain, what do they get as a reward for that? Valkain zachu lahamshich nefesh ruach neshama livneim achireim ad olam me'eser spheres kedusha sheba arba olam meis atzilus bri yitzir asiel lekol echad ve'echad kefi madrigasei ukefi meisav. At this point, we're about 3/4 way into this class, so I'm going to give a disclaimer, and that is, if you understand what we said until now, that's enough. Dayenu, as we're about to say at the Haggadah. That's enough.
I think it's the best 3/4 of an hour that I've heard of from Tanya.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get a little bit Kabbalistical and a little bit technical over the next 15 minutes. And we're going to learn it all, and I'm happy to sit and explain and discuss. But I just don't want it to be that if you lose me in the next 15 minutes, that it takes away from the last 45.
This is like cement.
Good. That's what I want it to be. the one thing that we have to take away is realizing that as an inheritance from our patriarchs and matriarchs, we have an inborn love and fear of God. How does that work? How do you unpack it? That's all future chapters. But from here until the end of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to discuss, with a lot of interweaving of Kabbalistical concepts, which I'll do my best to explain, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain exactly where does it come from and where does it live. Where in my psyche, where in my soul does this love and fear live? So for starters, we have to understand, where do souls come from? And we discussed this a little bit in chapter 2, when we introduced the idea of a godly soul. And that is, there are myriads of levels of souls. Levels. A hierarchy of quote-unquote better souls and worse souls.
What's the definition of soul?
So the soul that we're talking about here is a piece of God that is inside me, enlivening me. Now, a piece of God is a hard thing to quantify, because what is God? That I have a piece of Him. God's not a cake that I have a sliver inside of me. But when we talk about a soul, it's the idea of a godly energy that is inside of me. It is a source of life and a source of connection to God, because it's part of God. It's from God. However, the quality of my soul, the quality of that piece, right? I could be connected to God on a very, very high level, or I could be connected to God on a much lower level. And to be clear, every soul is holy and pure and perfect. But there's different levels within that. Because we're not talking about, this is Kabbalistical speak, so everyone will have to forgive me for a moment. God Himself is perfect and one, and there's no division within God Himself. However, that level of God is beyond us, beyond our comprehension. Therefore, in order for us to be able to relate to God, God shines through different methods. Godliness comes through different levels. And if we imagine it, if you have a light, right, a light bulb, when the light reaches me, is that light straight from the bulb? Absolutely. What if I take a piece of tint and put it over that? And suddenly the light that I'm seeing is blue. So now there's two things are true at the same time. This is that same original light coming through. However, it's being filtered by a specific color. Right? And what if instead of one piece of blue film, I put one piece of blue and red film, which means that on my table now, I have blue light and red light. So again, two things are true at the same time. This is from one God. This is God's light. This is all from, but it filters through different colors. Now, if we imagine instead of colors, if we imagine that instead of light, these are different abilities of God, different attributes of God, right? So then I can experience quote-unquote godliness, but it's the way God is filtered through kindness, through severity, through wisdom, through understanding, through different topics. If you want to know more about this, we gave a class a couple of years ago called the World of Kabbalah that went very in depth to exactly this process. This process is called Seder Hishtalshelus. And that is that we're imagining it as one filter, but really the light comes through levels of filters. There's different spiritual worlds, and within each world there are different the 10 attributes of God. If you didn't understand that, don't worry about it. This is a lot more than we can fit into a first time around Tanya class. Maybe next time when we go through it again, we'll spend a few hours on this topic itself.
When you say 10 attributes, you're talking about Sefer?
Yes, the 10 spheres. So my soul, which is again is a piece of God, could be coming from the highest world, the highest level, Chachma of Atzilus, or it could be coming from the lowest levels of the lowest worlds, Malchus of Asiya. Because there are 4 worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. That's Atzilus is the highest. Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. Again, what do those worlds represent and what are they doing there? A long conversation, not for this moment. Within each world, there are 10 attributes. Chachma, Bina, Das, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, etc. Which is love, severity, which is kindness, severity, balance, etc. within each one of those levels, also, my soul can be based on one of the three soul levels of nefesh, ruach, or neshama. What we have to take about from those last few minutes is that there are many gradations to souls. Which world it comes from, which attribute it comes from, etc.
Now we're getting into Kabbalah.
Yes, absolutely. The fact that we have a soul at all, and in that soul is an inborn love and fear of God, every single Jewish person has that. Now, can I guarantee you the quality? If anyone ever attended an event in like a stadium or something, you can have a seat, but you have no way of knowing, is it a courtside seat, or is it somewhere up in the nosebleeds being blocked by a pole? You have a seat, you're there, you're present. But there's a lot of levels to how exactly what your seat looks like. And the same is true with souls. We're going to read that paragraph in English now. Therefore, they merited the privilege of drawing down for all subsequent generations of their descendants forever a nefesh, ruach, and neshama from the 10 holy spheros of the 10 worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yitzhak, and Asiya. In which of the 4 worlds and from which sphere within these worlds, does the soul originate? Each individual according to his level and according to his needs. Each person has their own soul, depending on what God decided, depending on what your parents did, as we discussed in chapter 2. But for now, the important thing to realize is whether you have, as we know that most of us are from the lowest rungs, and that's both an honor and a privilege, because it means that we're the closest to the bottom. We are the ones that have to get the work done. We're the most practical, the most grounded, the most down to earth, you want to call it. But no matter where you are, right? Again, we're talking about levels. We're not talking about, is it good or bad? Everything is good, everything is holy, and everything is spiritual and a piece of God. The question is what flavor? Where exactly is your seat? You have a seat, the question is where. But no matter where your seat is, no matter where your soul comes from, al kol panim afilu lekal shebekalon peish Yisrael nimshach bezivugam nefesh de nefesh de malchus asiyah. At any rate, even the most unworthiest and most sinful Jew draws down by their marital union a nefesh from the level of nefesh and malchus asiyah, the attribute of royalty in the world of action, which is basically the lowest level possible. 2, when a Jewish child is created, when a Jewish fetus, a Jewish baby is created, no matter what the parents are like, no matter the level of observance, no matter what, there is automatically some soul. Some godly soul is there. Where does it come from? Maybe the lowest level of the low. Continuing on page 6. This is the lowest level of the holiness of the world of Natsiyah. Now, here's the thing to know about all of these attributes and all of these worlds. Because they all come from God, because again, they're all just different filters for the same light, on the back end, they're all connected. A practical place where we see this is as we count Sfiras HaOmer in a few weeks after starting from the second night of Pesach, we start a process of counting down till Shavuos, until the giving of the Torah, and every night there's a sort of a Kabbalistical side to that prayer as well, because every night has a certain attribute. Kindness, severity, balance, etc. But within those 7, for technical reasons it's the 7, not the full set of 10, but every one of those 7s is comprised of all the other 7. So the first night is kindness of kindness, chesed shebechesed. The next night is gevura shebechesed, severity within kindness. The next night is tiferes shebechesed, and balance or beauty within kindness. Now I will say, if you want to make these sephiros practical in your life, if you want to actually understand what are we talking about here, there is an incredible book, an incredible really calendar produced by Rabbi Simon Jacobson that goes through it. It's 49 pages, and for every one of the 49 combinations, it explains exactly what we're talking about. I'm not going to explore it here. That's a thing for another time. I'm happy to send out a link or bring a sample for anyone who wants to explore what we're talking about. But the basic idea is that on the back end, all of these worlds and all of these spheros are connected. So no matter where your soul comes from, it could be, maybe for no fault of your own, the lowest of the low, the lowest rung, it is still connected with all of the other levels, including the highest of the high. As we continue in page 6, Afal became Achashim Esther Spheres Octatius. Yet since Malchus is one of the 10 holy spheros, and since holiness is the realm of unity, where every level is comprised of all other levels, perforce, Kulam Mikulam Gam Michachma Asiya, it, the lowest level of Asiya, excuse me, is compounded of all the other levels of Asiya, including Chachma Asiya. Ubesechem Lubush Chachma de Malchus Atzilus. Within Chachma Asiya is closed Chachma de Malchus of Atzilus, wisdom of royalty in the world of emanation, which is, again, we're just tracing how even if your soul is lowest of the low, it's really connected to all the other levels, including the highest ones. Again, on page 6, if you're not following along, join the club. This is very Kabbalistical. I barely get it myself, but for now, I'll leave it. The important thing to realize is, the lowest of the low, and again, we're talking relative because we're still talking spiritual, holy, perfect souls, but the lowest of the low is connected with the highest. What's the highest level? Chachma. And so now we're going to try to unpack a little bit what Chachma is and why it's so important. Because Chachma, the idea of wisdom, is the foundational block for understanding all of this. Why? Because Chachma is the place. Remember we spoke about how we can only experience God through these different filters. And as we explained, they're not side by side. One leads to the next. It's a chain reaction. Where does that first link, right? If I'm connecting two items.
Could you define wisdom?
Yes, for the rest of the chapter. That's absolutely what we're doing now. Because we've used that term loosely. Usually we understand as part of the process of you understand something, then you unpack it, and then you have knowledge, which is about making it real, making it das, making it personal. But here the Alter is going to really explain what Chachma is. Why? Because Chachma is the first link of the chain. This entire process of all the worlds and all the attributes is a chain. The first link of the chain is the one that's connected to the beyond. That's the first filter, that's the first level, which means that contained within Chachma, within wisdom, is the great beyond. The great beyond in Hasidic speak is called Or Ein Sof, light beyond end. That's where God is. It's still not God Himself. God Himself is beyond our conversation, beyond our comprehension. But it's the place where God is expressed purely. It's like you have a light bulb and there's no filters and there's no shades and there's nothing. It's just a ball of light that expands endlessly. We couldn't possibly comprehend that. We couldn't possibly connect to that. It's beyond us, right? Even the word endlessly already starts short-circuiting our brains. How do we relate to it? Through the Seder Hishtalshelus, through the chain where Or Ein Sof comes into Malchus, comes into Chachma, and it goes down the chain until somewhere that we can appreciate and we can try to maybe think about possibly comprehending. But
the definition of the Sefirot.
Sefirot, so the way we're describing it here, and again, Sefirot could be a much longer conversation, the way we're describing Sefirot here is a way by which godliness is expressed to the world. A way by which that Or Ein Sof, that endless light, is actually looks on my table. If I have a light bulb and I put a blue filter in front of it, then what do I see? Blue light. That is what a Sephira is in our context right now. It's a way of connecting to God within a certain filter. But again, the idea, I really don't want to get too distracted, because again, this is really the first time that we've had Kabbalah as such an intrinsic part of our conversation, and it's important, and I want everyone to understand the basics. And I'm happy to sit afterwards and have a more in-depth conversation. Chachma, wisdom, is the foundational start of everything. And everything has within it Chachma. The continuing on page 7, K'dechsiv Hashem Chachma Yesod Aretz V'kulam Chachma Sitta, as it is written, God and His wisdom founded earth. The words God in His wisdom shows that Or Ein Sof, that endless light, is embodied and enclosed within wisdom And it's further written, in wisdom you made them all. Again, that everything is made through the concept of wisdom. So it comes out, where is God's infinite light? Where does that connect to? The top link of the chain. The top rung of the ladder. The very, very top, which is Chachma. As we continue, V'nimtza ki ein soif baruch hu melubash b'bchinas Chachma shebenefesh Adam yeh mi sheyeh miYisrael. Now, by the transitive properties, if all of us are connected to all the other levels, no matter what level your soul is from, it's connected to all the levels, including Chachma of Atzilus, the highest level, and in the highest level is God's infinite light, then by the transitive property, every soul is connected with that infinite light. Everyone follow that? On page 6, again, without getting into too many details, the Alter Rebbe introduced us that every soul, on the back end, every attribute in every world is connected. Because holiness is the idea of unity and everything is comprised of everything else. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2 means that if Chachma of Atzilus, the highest level, has within it Or Ein Sof, God's endless light, that means that all of us, no matter where our soul is from, has a connection to that endless light. Which means that within our soul, that highest level hidden there, it's hidden, but that endless light is within all of us. As we continue, thus we see that the light of the blessed Or Ein Sof is garbed within the faculty of wisdom in the human soul of whatever sort of a Jew he may be. Im Or Ein Sof baruch hu melubash ba mispash b'kol b'chinas hanefesh kula le'achyesim b'chinas reisha v'adragla. In turn, the soul's faculty of wisdom, together with the light of the blessed Or Ein Sof that is garbed in it, suffices all the levels of the soul in its entirety, from head to foot, as it were, i.e., from the highest level of the soul to the lowest, to animate them with godly vitality. K'dichsiv b'chachma hachachma techaya v'ala, as written, wisdom gives life to those who possess it. To finish off this Kabbalistical idea, not to see the end of the Kabbalah for the class, and I apologize, this is definitely one of those times where we go slightly over. Because of this idea that every soul on the back end is all connected, it's possible for two parents that are sinners, that are low life of the low, they can bring down a very, very lofty soul. Why is it possible? Because on the back end, they're all connected. On the back end, every soul is comprised and possibly connected to every other level of soul. Continuing on page 8, at times, the sinners of Israel may even bring down for their children very lofty souls, which have been deaf to the klippot, as explained in Sefer Gegulim, a very abstract, soul-centric conversation that we're going to skip for now, as it's in parentheses. But what do I see from what we discussed until now? Every single Jewish person, no matter the level of your soul, no matter, has within it God's endless energy, God's endless light. Now, Len asked a very good question, which is, can we define what wisdom is? Chachma. This first rung of the chain, this is the linchpin where it all depends on, right? Because all my levels of my soul are connected to the Chachma of my soul. The Chachma of my soul is connected to Chachma of Atzilus, to the highest possible level. And Chachma of Atzilus has within it God's endless light. What is Chachma? What does that word mean? Right? We understood it always as, I don't know, it's like the first formation of an idea. But here the Alter Rebbe is going to explain that the concept of Chachma is not understanding. Understanding comes later. Chachma is the source of understanding. If we imagine someone's trying to overcome a problem, trying to think about a solution, and suddenly in the moment that, oh, I got it. In that moment, if they're interrupted, they lost it. Right? They had an idea, it was starting to formulate, but it wasn't really there. It was starting to form. That's the level of Chachma. Bina, the next step, that's understanding. That's when you take that wisdom and you actually know what in the world you're talking about. But Bina is where understanding starts. Chachma itself is not something you can comprehend. You don't have it yet. Once you have it, it's Bina. Chachma is the seed of the idea before you can really sense what's going on. Right? It's like you plant a tree. Right? Once a tree starts growing from that seed, well, now you have a tree. Before then, do you have anything there? There's something there. There's a seed decomposing in the ground, but that's not the idea itself. That's not the tree itself. Chachma, while very connected with the process of understanding, is the step before understanding. It's where understanding comes from. It's when I have an idea or I have a solution or I have a new thought. It's that first moment, that first period of gestation of that idea when it's not really there yet. I can't grasp it. And the way you know that I don't have it yet is because someone interrupts me. I can't just press pause and come back to it later. If it's gone, it's gone. It's so ethereal, it's so not anything yet that it could so easily disappear.
So it really is more than just wisdom. I mean, a simple definition of wisdom has always been for me having knowledge and knowing the proper way of using that knowledge.
Right.
That's
So
wisdom.
we would term that as intellect. Intellect is a general term for Chachma, Bina, and Das. Those three Chabad. And I don't want to get too far off because again we're on a tightrope here. But what you're talking about is the entire process of understanding something. I have an idea. I have a thought. I fully unpack and understand that idea and what does it mean and the heights and breadths and the implications. And then there's Das, which is making it real, learning how to utilize and how to implement that knowledge. But that first step, what does wisdom mean? Wisdom, the way Kabbalah understands it, is beyond understanding, is above understanding, before I understand. Understanding is step 2. Before that is that initial seed of knowledge. Yeah.
I have a bookmark, a beautiful bookmark that reads, "Wisdom begins in wonder." And I believe that's what we're talking about, if that's not correct, Rabbi. The beginning of wisdom is that question, that wondering.
I mean, those words are very poetic, so I'm not going to be able to translate it directly into what we're talking about here, but that concept is absolutely a good way of understanding it. You're right.
Yes.
That the first step of understanding is that there's something there. It's not nothing.
It's the start.
Right. It's the very, very, very beginning of a start.
Yes.
Stephanie, you had a question?
No.
Okay. So, continuing on page 9. Hine ha-chachma hi makar ha-seichel va-havana. Now, chachma, which is explained in chapter 3, is the initial flash of intellect, the nebulous, seminal glimmer of an idea, is the source of intelligence and comprehension, which first begin to emerge in the faculty of Bina, for as explained there, Bina represents the ability to grasp an idea in all situations. Hilamaylam habina, shu havana v'seichel v'hasagase. It is higher than Bina, which is the faculty of understanding an idea and grasping it. Once I can understand, once I know what I'm talking about, that's already Bina. So what's Chachma? Chachma is that first flash, that first, I think I have something. Chachma is above understanding. It's the source of understanding. Where do all my good ideas come from? The shower head. Right? When you're in the shower, that's where all the ideas start coming and start flowing and you have all your good plan. What are we talking about here? We're talking about how before I have an idea, before I understand what my idea is, there's a glimmer of an idea, there's the first flash of inspiration, but it's ethereal. There's nothing to it. If I stop in that moment, I can't get it, which is why the word chachma itself represents this idea. Continuing on page 10. V'zehu lashon chachma koyach ma shu ma she'einu musag u'muvan ve'einu nitfas b'seichel b'hasaga adayin. The etymological composition of the word chachma indicates this dual nature. Chachma contains two words, koyach ma, the faculty of the unknown. Literally, ma means what. Hence, while it is an intellectual faculty and thus related to the other lower faculties, it is a faculty which cannot yet comprehend or be grasped by intellect, and is therefore also above and beyond the others. So what is chachma? Chachma is something, an idea that I don't really understand yet. It's above my understanding. It's part of the process of intellect, but it's above what I can understand. So what lives in Chachma? Remember? God's endless light. An idea that I cannot comprehend. An idea that's above understanding, that if I try to unpack what God's endless light is within my understanding, I'll have a short circuit. I'll have an explosion. My mind will literally be blown. Why? Because it's beyond my understanding. In that moment, in that idea of beyond understanding, that is where God's endless light resides. Or Ein Sof. As we continue, for this reason, the light of the Ein Sof, blessed be He, who can in no way be comprehended by any thought, is vested in Chachma. The only place within my psyche, within my processes, within my intellect or emotion that I can relate to God, that I can connect to God's endless light, is in the part of my brain that I don't understand. Is in the part that's beyond understanding. Because God is beyond understanding. But here's the catch. Because it's beyond understanding, it does not make a difference what my level of intelligence or knowledge is. Because it's not about how much I understand God or how much I know about God. It's beyond that. Where does Ein Sof, God's endless light, where does that live? In the place of my psyche that's beyond understanding. Which also means, in other words, it's not limited by my understanding and by my knowledge. And therefore, even those with lesser knowledge, right? Someone who's not learned, and at the time that the Alter Rebbe wrote this, what was a good example of people who were less learned? Women. This is not a personal thing. It's a practical thing. During that time, women didn't learn. These days, the Rebbe encouraged and re-encouraged that women should learn and have the education and have the knowledge. But during that time, lest you think that a woman with her lack of knowledge is at any disadvantage here, absolutely not. Because this is not about how much you know or how much you don't do. I'm just prefacing that because we're about to use the word woman in a seemingly like, oh, they don't know anything. Again, it's just a practical thing. In those times, they didn't learn much about God. Does that mean they don't have a connection with God? Does that mean they don't have this Ein Sof? No. Because the whole idea of where the Ein Sof is within my psyche is in the part that's beyond understanding, which means it's not limited by how much I know or how much I don't know.
I mean, if God is beyond understanding, how can we ever know anything about God?
Because God chose to put certain parts of His identity into places that we can't comprehend. That again goes back to the Sphira. That I cannot understand God Himself, but I can understand things about God. I can understand that God operates in a certain way. I can understand that God wants certain things or that God doesn't want certain things. Which, by the way, this goes back to the idea of Torah study. Why is Torah study so important? Because it's the only way, by learning seemingly innocuous laws about bulls or about Shabbos or about the most practical, down-to-earth laws, it's the only way my brain can comprehend God. Because I can't comprehend God Himself. I can comprehend what God chooses to allow me to comprehend.
Is Torah is revelation?
Yes, absolutely. Torah is revelation. We discussed this in an earlier chapter. We discussed the process by which God's will and wisdom comes down into the world. Torah and mitzvos is the one place that down here, I'm learning about a sheep and a goat. But that sheep and a goat is a revelation of God's innermost desires that I usually couldn't comprehend. As we discussed at length there, and I'm happy to continue after. Hence, v'lachein kol Yisrael afilu hanashim v'amei aretz hein ma'aminim b'Hashem she'amuna hi lamayla min hadas v'hasaga. Hence, all Jews, even the women and the illiterate, who have no knowledge of God's greatness, believe in God, since faith is beyond understanding and comprehension. What is this Ein Sof in my soul? How does that express itself? As a belief in God. And this is something where Judaism is so specific. There are two things in our relationship with God. There is my understanding of God, which is the commandment, I have to learn about God, I have to know what God wants, I have to use my brains. But there's something beyond my brains as well, and that is my faith in God. And every single Jewish person, no matter their level of knowledge and no matter level of understanding of God, has faith, has belief in God. Why? Because that lives in a place within us that's above understanding. For our scripture states, the fool believes everything, but the clever man understands. Now this is from the words of King Solomon, and it seems to be a pretty derogatory statement against the believers. Right? A fool is the one who believes everything. A wise man understands it. But this verse is talking about specifically things that we're supposed to understand. Only a fool is gullible enough to take everything at face value. We are supposed to use our brain, we're supposed to understand, we're supposed to learn. But that could only apply to things that I'm able to understand. Right? If I try to understand something that's beyond my comprehension, then I'm the fool. Someone who goes around life insisting that they understand everything. Everything in the world has to meet their approval. They have to do their own. Well, it depends. Is this something that it's possible for you to understand? By all means, do your research, understand it. Is this something that's beyond your comprehension? Which, between me and you, the only thing that's really beyond our comprehension is God. Because technically speaking, I can learn anything. Now, will I say that me, as someone who's never gone to medical school, can sit here and argue with Len about a medical question? Of course not. At a certain point, we trust our doctors, we trust our experts, because they're the ones who actually understand. But when we're talking about the realm of what you could understand, we should understand. When we're talking about the realm that we cannot understand, then all of us are fools when it comes to God, because none of us can understand God. As the saying goes, people who ask, I can't understand why God did something. Would you want to believe in a God that you could understand? If I could understand everything that God did, then that would be my job. I would be God. The whole idea of a God, the whole idea of our belief in God is that there are parts of Him that are beyond our understanding. And so it's important for us to recognize and understand that are there parts that we have to understand and believe understand and learn and study? 1,000%. And in that realm, only a fool is gullible and believes everything that they're heard. But in the realm that we cannot comprehend, in the level of godliness that's hidden within our psyche beyond understanding, all of us are fools in that regard, because none of us can understand. As he continues at page 11, in relation to the Almighty, who is beyond intelligence and knowledge, and who can in no way be comprehended by any thought, all men are like fools before Him, and they can therefore grasp Him only through faith. As King David wrote, for it is written, I am foolish and ignorant, I am as a beast before you, and I am constantly with you. Those two things go hand in hand. Because King David recognized, and King David was a Torah scholar, King David was a very wise man who learned and studied and sought to understand. But by understanding and by realizing that there are certain parts that I'm like an animal. Just like an animal doesn't understand, there are certain things that I cannot understand. And therefore, when intellect stops, what starts? Faith, belief. And that's how we can be Tamid Imach, constantly with God. Kolemar, Bezesh ani varu behema, ani Tamid Imach, meaning that because I approach you as a fool and a beast, i.e. through the irrational power of faith, precisely therefore I am constantly with you. So coming back to our conversation, there are parts of our relationship with God that are dependent on our understanding and are dependent on our intellect. But then there are parts that are not. There are parts that are completely about our faith and belief in God. And every single Jewish person has that belief and faith equally. By virtue of them having a soul, having an inheritance from Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, we have that belief. And therefore, even quote-unquote the lowest of the low, it might be very, very buried by them because they covered it up with dirt and they covered it up. But somewhere within them, they have this inborn love, fear, and faith.
Does God want our belief to be total, or does He want us to question?
It depends what. He wants us to question, but also realize that certain things have no answers. And certain things don't have no answers because they're wrong, but because we cannot comprehend the answer. Right? A question, how could God do something like the Holocaust? It's a question we can ask. It's a question we should ask. But we also have to have the humility to recognize that resides in the parts of God that are beyond us. Right? The question of why does God want this animal as opposed to that animal as an animal sacrifice, that lives somewhere that maybe I could understand about different animals. The question of why does God want, if two people come to court and one says A and one says B, God wants the answer to be B. Why is that like the case? Let's study. Let's open up a Gemara and learn it together. The question of why did the Holocaust happen? That's not a question that we can find an answer. That lives in the part of faith. Does that mean that once I come across a wall that I don't know the answer to this, that suddenly I guess I don't believe that God was there by the Holocaust? No. I do believe he was there. But that lives in the part of faith that's beyond understanding. Because they're absolutely, both of those are true. God wants us to ask, and to parts that we're able to uncover, God didn't give us an entire Torah for us to have it sit on a shelf. He wants us to learn and to ask and to fight and to disagree and to uncover the truth. But there's also parts of our relationship with God that are completely about faith beyond understanding. V'lachein, to finish up our discussion, v'lachein afilu kal shebakal mo'peish Yisrael meisrim nafshem ha'kiddush Hashem al arev v'sevlim inuvam kashim shalei lichber b'Hashem echad. Where does this faith come out? Where can you see this faith? If it's buried so deep, but it's there, the answer is that by and large, no matter what level they're at, if you give a Jewish person a choice and say either God or your life, either bow down to an idol or I'll kill you, by and large, the Jewish people, no matter the level of intellect, no matter the level of understanding, no matter how holy, how spiritual, by and large, the Jewish people have said, take my life. Because when it's so clear that this is a question about my connection with God, suddenly that pintel yid, we call it in Yiddish, that internal spark of Judaism, that internal spark of godliness flames up into a fire and doesn't let me go against God. What do you mean? You spent your entire life, you didn't know the word God. You barely knew you were Jewish. And yet, if someone tries to give me that choice and saying, are you Jewish or are you not? Do you have a connection with God or not? I can't give up my connection with God. Where does that come from? Where does the idea of giving up our life for God, and again, only in specific circumstances, but we'll use the example of idol worship because that's very, very clear cut. Where does that choice come from? Where does the ability of, by and large, any Jewish person to give up their life? It comes from this spark of Ar Ein Sof that's within all of us. Do I understand it? No. Did I live my life based on it? No. Did I learn about it? No. But it's there beyond my understanding. Therefore, as a rule, even the most worthless of the worthless and the sinners among Israel sacrifice their life for the sanctity of God's name and suffer harsh torture rather than deny God's unity. Even if they are boors and illiterates who are ignorant of God's greatness. Even the little knowledge they do possess is not what motivates them, for they do not delve into it at all, so that by no means does their self-sacrifice result in any knowledge or contemplation of God. Continuing at page 12, Ella belishum das v'hizbeninus naki'ilu hu davar she'i efsher klal lechbar b'Hashem echad. Rather, they are prepared to sacrifice their lives without any knowledge or reflection, but as though it is completely impossible to renounce the one God, belishum taino mayna klal, without any reason or rational argument whatsoever. Hainu mishum sh'Hashem echad meir ma'chaya kol nefesh. This is because the one God illuminates and animates the entire soul. Though through being clothed in the faculty of chachma, which is beyond any graspable knowledge or intelligence. Let's summarize this chapter in a few sentences. Every single Jewish person has the same operating system, has the same internal soul. Now, there are absolutely differences in the level of soul that I have, in the level of understanding that I can, level of intellectual connection that I have with God. Every one of us understand God a little bit differently, can understand different things. Some of us are smart, some of us are less smart. Some of us are knowledgeable, some of us are less knowledgeable. And all of those are distinctions that we have. Every human is different. But there's one thing that every Jewish person has, which goes beyond the intellect, beyond the understanding, right? And so it's not limited by that. No matter if you know everything about God and you spend all day meditating about it, or if you once heard that there is a God and that's all you know about Him, every single Jewish person has a piece of Or Ein Sof, of God's limitless light within us. Do we understand it? No. Do we comprehend it? Do we know what it's taught? No. But it's there. And because it's there, it does not allow us to go against God in such an open and revealed way as God forbid, converting against God. Do I understand why? If I were to ask a Jew logically, right, and this is something that in the aftermath of October 7th, so many people felt a visceral reaction to the fact that the Jewish people were attacked. And you can ask them logically, let's sit down. You have never once in your life walked into a synagogue. You have never once in your life actively chose to do a mitzvah. Now, every Jew accidentally does a lot of mitzvahs, and every Jew is full with mitzvahs. But you have never once in your life sought out to do a mitzvah. You have never once in your life cared about the fact that you're Jewish. Why does it affect you on such a visceral, emotional level that the Jewish people were attacked? And the answer is because deep within us, on places that we don't like to, we don't necessarily think about, on places we don't necessarily run our life by, but deep within us we have that neshama, we have that soul that connects us to each other and connects us to God. So push comes to shove. If you put pretty much any Jew and you give them a black and white choice, either convert or I kill you. Now logically, there are differences. Someone who spent their entire life learning about God and understanding God and building a relationship with God, of course they'll say yes. But someone who never once thought about God, are they going to say yes as well? Sometimes. There are exceptions to every rule. But why would anyone who doesn't have the connection choose to give up their life for God? And the answer is because beyond our understanding, there is an inborn, inherited connection and presence of God, as we'll continue to unpack over the next few weeks. Just a quick heads up that, of course, next week we're going to have class, but the week after we'll be off for Pesach, and we'll discuss the schedule as we go forward. Whew.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. This is definitely one of the, as we get into it, more in-depth and Kabbalistical angles of the Talmud, of Tanya, but the knowledge is there, and now we have to just learn it 10 or 20 more times.